Two of America's biggest banks just warned of incoming disaster. Even poker face Jerome Powell is starting to crack, sprinkling his usual sweet nothings with warnings that the Fed is close to being forced to restart the money printers despite galloping inflation. The warnings come from J.P. Morgan, whose CEO, Jamie Dimon, warns that inflation will stay higher for longer than markets think, driven, of course, by massive federal deficits. He warns this would also keep interest rates high, which could crash smaller companies who are running out of cash, as well as keeping mortgages and credit cards at rates slightly above what the mafia charges. Incidentally, Dimon is the front-runner for Trump's Secretary of Treasury, so he will have Trump's ear. The second warning comes from Citigroup, who put out a new report predicting what Zero Hedge calls a rate cut bomb, a near-panicked series of 10 rate cuts starting in a few months and running all the way through next July. Now, that's something that only happens when the economy careens into recession, when the Fed desperately pumps the rescue meds, the rate cuts, to an economy that has flatlined. Put them together, and Dimon thinks inflation will keep running. Citi thinks the economy will collapse. We have a name for this: stagflation. Now, normally when the economy crashes, the Fed lowers interest rates to pump up spending. But all that new money, of course, also drives up inflation. So it's always a trade-off for the Fed between growth and inflation. The problem is when both crash and inflation come at once. The Fed's standard tools are not built to handle stagflation because it's not supposed to happen. That means the Fed is winging it, or as Jerome Powell famously put it last year, quote, navigating by the stars under cloudy skies. In other words, they have no idea what they're doing. Stagflation, of course, has been on our radar for a few years now, ever since the money-printing orgy of the 2020 lockdown set off the worst inflation of 50 years, followed by the most savage rate hikes in 50 years. The biggest surprise has been how long it's taken for stagflation to appear, apparently postponed by trillion-dollar deficits and yet more trillions in private debt from credit cards to car loans. Of course, that put it off, but it actually made it worse, because now the American public is facing stagflation while it is essentially drowning in debt. So what's next? Brought to you by Unchained.com. While all this looks pretty gloomy, there are two big factors that could head off disaster: geopolitics and Donald Trump. Geopolitics meaning if the wars end tomorrow, we would see crashing oil prices along with a systemic reduction in risk that could boost investment. That would take the edge off inflation. It could even slow the job losses. The bigger factor is Trump. A few days ago, I outlined his pro-growth agenda for a second term, from regulation to taxes to ending those wars. That would definitely boost growth, which reduces inflation. And even if Trump is at least 6 months away, markets are already reacting, with Trump-sensitive sectors like energy rising as a Trump win becomes more likely on the betting markets. Still, even if help is on the way, it's almost certainly too late to avoid the stagflation altogether. Economies move at a long lag, and even without bank warnings, mass layoffs and faltering consumers tell us the stagflation is already on our doorstep. A new episode of the Roundup podcast just went live. Give it a listen on all the major platforms or at petersandhonest.com. Okay, we'll be watching. See you next time.